So I just wanted to share with you, and I'm really here to seek your advice, actually, about what's been happening in the first decade of the experience at CIHR, which was formed out of really the merging of NHRDP and MRC together, with a very wonderful vision that biomedical clinical health services and policy and population health research was going to be vital to the continued capacity, innovation to deliver better and better health care and achieve better health for our country and for the world, for that matter. And if you look at the how money is spent, and CIHR has been growing, and it's now at about $1 billion a year, and about $500 million of that is spent in the open grants competition. And this is the breakdown of funding in the open grants competition. $150 million is given for strategic initiatives by the 13 institutes. So if you look at this, let me just help you understand the numbers. So the big blobs are essentially people's self-declared pillar alignment. And you can see the number of what NPI is nominated principal investigator. So you can see, and the purple is the dollar amount and the red is the number of principal investigators. So you can see that in the first 10 years of life of CIHR, 82% of all funding in the open grants competition went to biomedical. 9% to clinical, 3% to health services, and 6% to population health. If you look at the principal investigators, 66% or 2/3 of the principal investigators are biomedical scientists, and 7% are from health services, and 10% are from population health. So I'm not sure if this is the right balance, but I think that this is a challenging balance. There's many things that are discovered in the biomedical community that are thrown over the fence to sort of, maybe this will help in healthcare somehow. And I'm not sure we have the capacity or we have the funding formula right here, in my opinion. And this is kind of fixed because of the number of committees. I think there's 52 committees or 53, I'm not sure. And a certain proportion gets funded with each committee. So, of course, the number of committees will determine how the funding gets allocated, and most of them are biomedical communities or committees. And so with the new open grants reform, it will be an application-centric review, which means there's no guarantees anymore. And now everybody's in an uproar, which I can understand because it's a whole new world. And so what will happen is unclear. But one thing I was given when I first arrived at CIHR, as Pierre Chartrand was leaving, and he had taken upon himself to do a 6-month sort of look at the data at CIHR, and these first 2 slides are from him. And he wanted to know, about this is about getting sustained funding. So if you get a grant at CIHR, what's the likelihood that you will be continuously funded for the next 5 years? And so he looked at the trajectory of people by pillar. And you can see that for the top line, 62% of people who are biomedical scientists get continuous funding for 5 years. Now, maybe you don't need continuous funding, but if you want to rebuild your lab every 2 years, that could be one way of spending your money and your time. Or finding your students are falling off the cliff because you don't have any money to pay them. And so when you look at this, you think this is probably not a happy situation. And at the end of 5 years, you only have 17% of health services researchers that have received continuous funding for those 5 years. And that probably is not a good thing. And so it was sort of, here, Robyn, do something about that. So I said, okay. So my first hypothesis was, well, they weren't counting this right? Because health services researchers, maybe they are co-PIs and they didn't really pay attention to that. So I'll get into this. So it's been 6 months of drilling into the data to figure out what's going on here, and I'll show you that. But another piece of bad news, I thought was kind of bad news, was that, this is a recent evaluation that was done, not yet released, of the open grants reform program. And this is getting the research reporting system, I think the first 556 applicants who reported there. And this is looking at it by pillar, the number of publications per year adjusted for grant duration. So you can see that health services is actually not producing as much as others, even adjusting for the difference in the duration of their grants. And they're not really, although they're a little bit, they're not really spending their time doing reports first and then publishing later, which is one hypothesis. They're doing it more than others, but not really by that much. But one thing is true, and I think this is a very easily fixed problem, and that is that health services, when they apply for money in the open grants competition, the average duration of their grants is 2.3 years, and that's significantly shorter than everybody else, and particularly biomedical, which is up at 3.4. And this is an issue, because that means you're always in this mode of writing grants because your grant has come to an end. And I was reminded by Pat Martin, so I spent the first day with here, that was the way it was, that it was encouraged that you have these little short grants and then you come back for more, right? So this is probably a problem, and this is a fixable problem. We just have to encourage people to ask for longer grants. And we're moving into a programmatic research program where longer grants will be the name of the game, and we just need to get ourselves up to speed and say we can do this, and I think we can. But the thing I was wondering about, and this has to do with the counting of what happened to the researchers, is I thought, okay, well maybe they are. So this is giving you a glance at what's happening overall, and then what's happening in our community. So let me just walk you through this. So first of all, overall, there's 4,726 people who are researchers that apply between 2001 and 5. And in health services, there were 444. So that's the numbers we're talking about. And immediately we said, okay, well, it's a PI or co-PI application, and if it was funded, then great, we're counting you. And you can see I upped the numbers from 17% to 27.5% when you recognize that health services researchers often tend to work in teams, and they will co-PI because they are naturally equitable people, and they share well. So I upped it to 27.5, but it's still far different than 41.4 who had sustained funding for the next 5 years. So then we looked at the sustained funders, and we realized that, of interest is that there is an unusually high proportion in our community that are straddling two pillars. They're either in Pillar 3.4 or they're in Pillar 2.3. So that's an interesting observation. I'll come back to that later. But the next question I had was, well, maybe they're off working as embedded researchers within decision-making organizations. They're getting funding that way. They really don't need to come to CIHR for funding. Or they're getting funding from the provincial funding authorities, and that's still possible. But one thing is true, and if you look down at sustained appliers, so we called them sustained appliers, meaning you were applying, and if you had got your grant in each and every time you applied, you would have been sustained, right? So what's interesting is it's not that people aren't applying. They are applying, but they're not getting predictable funding. And so that leads to another issue. But I just want to point out that we have some things here that I think are potentially fixable. So then we want to say, well, let's look at everybody and let's look at ourselves, and let's see what's predicting whether or not you're sustained. And that will help us develop the kind of policies we need to support more of our researchers being sustained. So I'll just walk you through this so you can see that the thing that was obvious to begin with, which is biomedical people tend to be sustained, and they tend to ask for longer grants to begin with. So we started with your first grant. Was your first grant awarded, was it in a strategic competition or an open? And the answer is that if your first grant was a strategic competition, you're less likely to be sustained. Now, why is that? It's probably because most of the money is in the open. And if you haven't succeeded in the open, the fact that you're in the open and you're succeeding is already a sign that you're comfortable there, and you're probably going to do better. The next piece was really interesting, which is, was your first grant a resubmission, yes or no? And if it was a resubmission, you were less likely to be sustained if you're a general researcher, not health services. But in health services, the opposite is true, meaning we get you to come back. And so what we're measuring is doggedness in science. So we ask you to come back again and again. And that's why, and you're coming for those little short grants, right? So, so this is a key factor that I think that we can change. And we don't need to make people come back again and again and again. And I think there are some things that we can fix that will prevent that happening. Another thing we can fix that is relevant is coming back for renewal, meaning you are in a programmatic research program already and you're coming back to renew that program. So that, of course, increases your chances of being sustained. Renewals tend to be funded at the rate of about 50%. So we don't do that very much, and in fact, it was very hard to do this analysis because there's so few people in that cell, right? So that's another thing that's fixable, and of course, will be encouraged in the new open reform for people to move more into programmatic kind of approaches to research. Number of investigators was interesting, but not really significant. We looked at age not relevant. Here's another thing that is relevant, however, and I don't know what to think about this, and that is that there is a male scientist bias that came out in the CERCs, which were all men. So there was a poster up yesterday where we actually drilled in this at the funding level, and I think that it has to do probably, it's only present in the latter part, mid to later career. So it's not at the beginning. So I think this is probably related to childbearing and so on, but just to say that it's there. And then finally, we looked at your behavior over that 5 years to see whether or not there were some clues there about what we needed to do that would make things more positive for our community. So this is what your grant application type behavior was and what you were doing. So if you switched universities, it didn't make a difference. If you switched pillars, though, meaning you were back and forth straddling these pillars in terms of your grants, it means that you have now 6 or 7 committees that you can go to and not 2 or 3. And so that probably is relevant in that you're increasing your diversity. You're an entrepreneur, you're working both sides of the tennis court, so to speak. So that's an interesting factor. Another, which I think is important for us to know, is that if you had a career award, you're much more likely to be sustained. And I think this is buying out time and making people, giving them the time to do their research and to do the work. And so that's important, and it's important for us in thinking on the go-forward plan as to how we should best do that. And that's where I would appreciate your advice. Receiving bridge funding, this is oftentimes, CHR has to give money back if they don't give the money away, so they often actually will fund a year's worth of a grant. And in fact, that seems to be important. It's a technical reason, will be for one reason for making you sustained, but I know from my colleagues that that actually is quite appreciated and helps you get going on a piece of work that you're going to do. And most importantly, 2 other factors here from a policy perspective is that successful people tend to straddle the line of strategic and open. They don't do only open, they don't do only strategic. I don't think we pushed people enough into the open. You got to go out there and get it in the open competitions, because that's where all the money is. And then finally, this issue of the doggedness thing. So if you're going to resubmit your grant again and again and again, you will succeed in our community. Can we make it so that you don't have to do it so many times? I talked to Jean Haggerty. She said she submitted 4 times. She got it in her 5th time. And so I think that there's something to be said here about we could do this a bit more smart and better. So here are a few things on the go-forward plan, and one is, I think, this concept of supporting people through their entire career pathway is important because we need to actually foster a community and to foster that long-term sustained research capacity that will allow us to train the next generation. I think we need to partner more with the universities to both train and retain health services researchers. And I think Steve's competencies and identifying the programs and then working out some partnerships is going to be very important. We have had an underrepresentation on both the CRC chairs and in the Vaniers and in the Bantings, where we are completely shut out in the last round. So I think that we need to partner with the universities and get our scorecard up to the front of the line. And I think partnering with ministries. I think Cadre has set a very interesting precedent in the country for how we do business. We were advised in our international review to do much more embedded research, meaning why aren't you out there working with the ministry people on their incredibly cool and neat programs that they're doing, and why aren't you involved with that? So I think that that's something we have to figure out how to do better, and Cadre has given us a good head start. The second thing I think that we've learned from internationally is when you have data and data is lying around, it's easier to do research, and if you can get access to that you can get a lot more done, you get a lot of student projects done. And so I think that we need to up the game on the data factory. We have the best data, I think, among many in the world. I think we have some of the best data in the world. And in fact, we train people how to do that. We actually successfully mounted the Drug Safety and Effectiveness Network with that, and we should just go for it and actually amplify what we have already and what we could do better. And then finally, I think we need to develop, to continue to develop a mentoring community. I think we need to improve the training and support for excellence in peer review. I've heard many, when we looked at the survey of researchers, this is where they were most unhappy. The quality, the non-reproducibility, the superficial comments, da-da-da-da-da. I mean, they're fed up, they're discouraged, and I think that we need to do something there. No big surprise. I mean, we don't train chairs, we don't train SOs, and we don't train peer reviewers, and we don't reward them, and so it's not surprising that we're doing a hit-and-miss job. We need to, I think, prepare our community for the changes in the open grants competition. So I need your input on that. What do you think is the best way to do that? We're going to move into a programmatic project stream. It's going to be new for us, and I think I'm not as concerned about can we do these grants, but I'm concerned about whether we can review them properly. And then finally, I think we've done a lot of work on different models of mentoring, and I think that we need to continue that, but with much more formal evaluation. I realize there's very little science on science, so you can do applied chair, you're going to do a, what are you going to do, what's going to work, is you don't really know, and that's sort of the sad thing. There are opportunities, though. I think you've heard about the strategy for patient-oriented research. It is a consortium of partners, provincial partners from the provincial funding agencies, the ministries, the voluntary health organizations, and CIHR. And in there are opportunities for us. It started up very much as a clinical trials network. It has moved very, very much more into the health services research implementation science end of the spectrum. For many, many provinces, this is where they see the big gap is. We do have and have had a very powerful working group working on data platforms and services. I think you'll like what you see coming out of that area, and CFI may be co-funding with us in that area to create something that will be a rich resource for health services research. We've got buy-in for supporting career development in both methods and health services research. So I think that this is a great way forward, and buy-in for essentially, partner programs with the provinces to address their gaps and holes, and to mount, really the programs that have been spawned through our community, such as partnerships with health system improvement and rapid systematic reviews and so on, that both CHSRF created and CIHR has taken on. So I think there's opportunities. I really would appreciate your advice, and look forward to it. Thank you.